All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipovich Show is my friend Molly Knefel. Molly is a comedian, a writer, and the co-host with her brother John Knefel of Radio Dispatch, which you can find at theradiodispatch.com. You can also follow her on Twitter at Molly Knefel. Molly, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me back.
All right, so Molly, a few weeks ago, New York City's Stop and Frisk practices were found unconstitutional by a district court judge. You actually have a great piece up currently at Rolling Stone about New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg's reaction to that ruling. Why don't you tell us all about it?
Right. Well, so after Judge Shenlin's ruling, Mayor Bloomberg had a press conference where he continued the fear-mongering that he and Ray Kelly have both been leaning heavily on in their fight to defend Stop and Frisk. And Mayor Bloomberg said that he said a lot of things, but one of the things that he said was how much he fears for the children. You know, he said, I fear for your kids and I fear for my kids. And because Bloomberg's argument is that Stop and Frisk is keeping the city safer, is keeping the murder rate down. Even though obviously the lower murder rate is not directly connected to the amount of stops, and in fact, stops that went down in 2012 alongside the murder rate also going down. But he relies on this rhetoric that our children need Stop and Frisk to be safe, and that particularly resonated with me because I am an after-school teacher, and I know firsthand that Bloomberg's policies when it comes to children, especially children in, under-resourced communities, his record is absolutely abysmal, and he has slashed social programs that support kids, and so that was kind of what got me thinking about Bloomberg's use of Bloomberg evoking the safety of children in order to defend Stop and Frisk.
No, it's absolutely, completely hypocritical what he's saying there, because obviously when you look at, well, let's get to the education stuff in a minute, but let's we've talked about Stop and Frisk before on the show, but, one thing you actually write is that 1/5 of those who are actually stopped and frisked in New York City are actually children. And so literally, you're talking about a program they think is keeping children safe is actually 1/5 of them who are actually stopped are actually kids.
That's right. It was, about 21% of the stops in 2011 were people ages 8 to 18. So, that's children. And we hear a lot about, luckily there have been some narratives about Stop and Frisk that have pushed their way into the mainstream media. And we've heard about how Stop and Frisk targets young black and brown men primarily. And which is, the data shows that to be absolutely true, and that's the population that's disproportionately targeted. But alongside that population, which we've heard a little bit about, LGBTQ youth are also extremely highly targeted, as are young trans women of color, homeless youth, and just kids who are, living in these neighborhoods that are highly policed, trying to go to school, trying to go to work. Kids are stopped early in the morning when they're on their way to school. It can make them late to school, which affects their attendance records. I spoke with a teenager who's 17, who said that she had been stopped 4 times over the course of her sophomore and junior year, and that she gets scared whenever she sees the police. So, this affects people in their communities, it affects school-age children, and it affects especially marginalized young populations like homeless youth, LGBTQ youth, things like that.
Well, I mean, just the idea of, a kid having to go, getting on the train or the bus to go to school or going to their after school job that they're working somewhere. A lot of people who do their normal commute, you got to think, okay, I'm going to allow myself a few extra minutes in case the train is late or something like that. But really, what we're asking these kids to do, let's schedule time into their commute for the possibility of being harassed and groped by the NYPD, essentially. Like that, I think people, if they think of it that way, that every day you need to schedule in 10 or 15 minutes if the cops decide to throw you aside to actually, pat you down. I don't think people really would like the fact that is something we're asking, kids to have to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And, your attendance record matters when you're in high school. And,
Yeah.
you don't want to, if you're late to your job, you don't want to lose your job because you didn't anticipate being stopped. And one of the people that I talked with, who's a youth advocate, says that, kids, there's such an emotional and social element of this that, maybe kids have adults at their school that they feel comfortable explaining why they're late, or maybe they can tell their boss. But, a lot of kids don't want to tell their principal that they were stopped by the police on their way to school, So in addition to this being a practical disruption, the people that I talked with really emphasized that there's an emotional element to this. There's also a social element. If you're out with your friends, you're out with your younger siblings, and you figure that you can't even walk around your own neighborhood without being stopped, it makes young people feel that they can't really go outside. And in addition to the diminishing social programs, like I mentioned earlier, not only are they not necessarily safe when they go outside, but they also don't have safe places to go.
Right. And I think, even the kind of stepping back, even looking at the slightly larger picture of this, the fact that I don't think we have a really a firm idea of what the kind of overall effect on society that I mean, obviously this is Stop and Frisk is a small problem with the NYPD is a group that's fairly much out of control. Yeah, and that's, even without Stop and Frisk, harasses people and does pretty horrible things on a fairly regular basis here. But just the kind of psychological effect and long-term societal effect that you would have on children who are pretty much taught that the police aren't there to help. They're actually there to harass you and pat you down and treat you like you're a criminal constantly. Just the kind of psychological effect that has on children for their whole entire lives is something that's actually really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And the same teenager I talked to who had been stopped 4 times over the last 2 years, she said that in one of the stops, the police officer was harassing her, telling her she didn't even deserve to go to school. I mean, saying these absolutely horrible, dehumanizing things. And she said to me, I don't even know why he was saying that because I was complying with all her orders. And so she felt like she had just been completely degraded and dehumanized by these police officers. And she had also said, she was like, when I was a little kid, I remember we used to know the police in the neighborhood. I remember even playing baseball with them. She said, and now none of the young people in her neighborhood will go to the cops because there's so much distrust because of Stop and Frisk.
Yeah, and that actually also has, again, I think most listeners to this show are against Stop and Frisk, but also the kind of long-term, if you have people who are afraid to go to police to report an actual crime, something that's dangerous, that actually makes the rest of the city more dangerous because if they're afraid to actually approach police to report a legitimate dangerous crime, perhaps, that actually means that person who committed the actual dangerous crime is actually more likely to get away and to continue to do things that actually harm the city.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a couple. It's important to have like 2 conversations at once about Stop and Frisk. One, which is it is unconstitutional as found by Judge Shinland, and that stands kind of regardless of whether it is effective or not. Right. Like as my friend Ryan Devereaux put it, you could stop everybody and search them, and that may be effective, but it's unconstitutional. It first and foremost is a violation of people's civil rights. also is ineffective and bad policing because it breeds distrust in communities, and it creates this rift between communities and police instead of actually fostering any sort of sense of community-based policing.